The stone hand that rose from nothing. There are fighters, and then there are forces of nature. Alex Pereira is the latter. This is the true story of a man who was born into absolute poverty, became an alcoholic as a teenager, worked construction until his body was breaking down, and then transformed himself into one of the most feared strikers in combat sports history. A man who knocked out the seemingly invincible Israel Adesanya not once, but twice. A man who became a two-division UFC champion and reclaimed his title in devastating fashion. This is not a Hollywood script. This is the story of POATAN, the stone hand, and how a kid from the favelas became a legend. July 7th, 1987, São Bernardo de Campo, a sprawling industrial city in the greater São Paulo metropolitan area of Brazil. In one of the countless favelas that cling to the hillsides like scars on the landscape, a boy was born into a world that offered him nothing but hardship. His name was Alexandro Silva Pereira, and from the moment he took his first breath, survival was going to be his only skill that mattered. The favelas of Brazil are not neighborhoods in any conventional sense. They're communities born from desperation, built on land nobody wanted, constructed from whatever materials people could find or steal. Corrugated metal, scrap wood, cinder blocks, all stacked together in structures that defy both logic and gravity. There's no city planning, no infrastructure. Water comes from wherever you can get it. Electricity is stolen from power lines in dangerous tangles of exposed wire. The police don't patrol these areas, they raid them. And when you're born in the favela, the world has already decided what your life is worth. Alex grew up in this environment, one of many children in a family that had nothing. His father worked whatever jobs he could find, breaking his back for wages that barely kept them fed. His mother did the same, working impossible hours just to keep her children alive. There was no money for toys, for new clothes, for school supplies. There certainly wasn't money for luxuries like sports or training. But what the favela did teach Alex was how to be tough. When you grow up surrounded by violence, when you see people getting robbed, beaten, killed over nothing, you learn quickly that strength is the only currency that matters. Alex got into fights as a kid, not because he wanted to, but because in that environment you either learned to defend yourself or you became a victim. He was naturally big for his age, naturally strong, and he had something else too. When he got angry, when adrenaline flooded his system, he hit harder than kids twice his age. But there were no coaches in the favelas to see his potential, no scouts looking for raw talent. There was just poverty and the grinding necessity of getting through each day. When Alex was still just a boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old, he had to make a choice that no child should have to make. His family needed money. They needed it desperately. So Alex dropped out of school, not high school, but middle school, and went to work. He became a bricklayer's assistant, one of the hardest, most physically demanding jobs you can do. Construction work in Brazil is brutal. You're out in the sun all day, temperature soaring past 100 degrees, humidity making it feel like you're breathing through a wet towel. You're carrying bricks, mixing concrete, hauling bags of cement that weigh almost as much as you do. Your hands get torn up, your back starts hurting constantly, your shoulders ache constantly, and you're doing this for maybe a few dollars a day if you're lucky.
Alex was a kid doing a man's job, and the men he worked with were hard, rough individuals who dealt with the misery of their lives the way many poor men do. They drank. After a long day of back-breaking labor under the merciless sun, they'd gather and pass around bottles of cachaça, cheap Brazilian liquor that burned going down and made you forget, at least for a few hours, how much your life hurt. And Alex, desperate to fit in, desperate to be treated like a man instead of a kid, started drinking with them. At 13 years old, he was drinking alcohol regularly. By his mid-teens, he had a serious problem. He wasn't just drinking socially anymore. He was drinking to cope, drinking to numb himself, drinking because it was the only escape he knew from a life that felt hopeless. The drinking got worse. There were periods where Alex was homeless, sleeping rough, his life spiraling into darkness. He was still working construction when he could get work, but the alcohol was taking over. He'd show up to jobs hungover, sometimes still drunk from the night before. His body was breaking down from the combination of brutal physical labor and substance abuse. He was in his early 20s, and he was already destroying himself. This is where most stories like this end. Another kid from the favela, another life consumed by poverty and addiction, another statistic. But something inside Alex refused to quit completely. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was anger at what his life had become. Maybe it was just that fighting instinct that had kept him alive in the favela as a kid. Whatever it was, it saved his life. In 2009, when Alex was 21 years old, he walked past a kickboxing gym. He'd been in plenty of street fights, had defended himself his whole life, but he'd never trained formally, never learned technique. He just knew how to brawl. But something made him stop that day. Maybe he was looking for a way out of the drinking. Maybe he just wanted to learn how to fight properly. Maybe he didn't even know why himself. He walked into that gym and he told the coach he wanted to train. The coach looked at this kid, rough around the edges, hands calloused from construction work, eyes that had seen too much, and probably didn't think much of his chances, but he let him train. Alex started learning kickboxing, and something clicked immediately. All that natural power he'd always had, all that fighting instinct from growing up in the streets, suddenly had technique behind it. He learned how to throw a proper punch, how to generate power from his hips, how to kick with devastating force. And more importantly, training gave him something he'd never had before: purpose. He started training in the mornings before work. He'd run in the afternoons after spending all day in the sun on construction sites. His body was exhausted constantly, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, he had something to work toward. He had something to work toward. And slowly, day by day, Alex started drinking less. The training was filling the void that alcohol had been occupying. He was getting stronger, faster, more skilled. The coaches started noticing that this kid who'd walked in off the street had something special. When he hit the pads, the sound was different, louder, sharper. When he sparred, even experienced fighters were getting rattled by his power. Within a few months, he had his first amateur fight. He won. Then he had another, and another. He kept winning, and each victory made him believe a little more that maybe, just maybe, he could make something of himself. Maybe he didn't have to be just another forgotten kid from the favela who died young and unmourned. But going professional in kickboxing, when you're from the favelas of Brazil, is not like joining a team in the United States or Europe. There's no sponsorship money. There's no training facilities with nutritionists and strength coaches. There's just you, your gym, and whatever fights you can get. Alex kept working construction during the day to pay his bills, then training at night, then fighting whenever he could. His early professional record was rough. He won some, he lost some. He was learning, improving, but he was doing it the hard way. In the ring, taking damage, figuring out what worked through trial and error. His style started to develop during these years. He wasn't the most technical striker, wasn't the fastest, didn't have the fanciest combinations, but what he had was power. Terrible, shocking power that could change a fight with a single shot. They started calling him POATAN, which means hands of stone in the Tupi language. It was a perfect nickname. When Alex hit someone clean, they didn't just feel it, they remembered it for the rest of their lives. His left hook became legendary in Brazilian kickboxing circles. It came fast, heavy, and if it landed flush, the fight
was over. Alex kept grinding, kept fighting, kept improving. He started winning more than he lost. He started finishing fights, knockout power. In 2015, Alex got the call that would change his career. Glory Kickboxing, one of the premier kickboxing organizations in the world, wanted him to fight. This was the big leagues. The best kickboxers on the planet competed in Glory, and they wanted to see what this Brazilian with the stone hands could do. Alex made his Glory debut and immediately made an impact. He wasn't fighting local competition anymore. He was facing world-class strikers, champions, killers, and he was holding his own. His power translated perfectly to this level. In fact, it was even more effective because these elite fighters weren't used to someone hitting this hard. He started racking up wins in Glory, knockouts, brutal, highlight reel knockouts. When Alex connected with his left hook or his devastating low kicks, fighters went down like buildings being demolished. The kickboxing world was buzzing about this Brazilian who'd come out of nowhere and was destroying everyone they put in front of him. And then, in 2016, Alex was matched up against a rising star who was taking the kickboxing world by storm. His name was Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya was everything Alex wasn't. He was technical, flashy, creative. He'd been training in martial arts since he was a kid, had a background in taekwondo and karate, had all the fundamentals drilled into him from a young age. He moved like a dancer, struck from angles you didn't see coming, and he was undefeated as a professional. He was being called the future of the sport. He was supposed to be untouchable. The fight took place on April 2, 2016 at Glory of Heroes 1 in Brazil. Adesanya came out doing what he did best, moving, feinting, striking from range, using his reach and movement to control distance. Alex came out doing what he did best, stalking forward, cutting off the ring, loading up that left hook, looking for the kill shot. For 3 rounds, they went to war. Adesanya was slick, but Alex was relentless. Every time Adesanya tried to create space, Alex cut him off. Every time Adesanya tried to point fight from the outside, Alex would punish his legs with low kicks that made the crowd gasp. And Alex kept walking forward, no matter what Adesanya threw at him, like some kind of Terminator that couldn't be stopped. When the decision was announced, Alex's hand was raised. He had beaten the undefeated Adesanya by unanimous decision. It wasn't a knockout, but it was decisive. The kid from the favela, the former alcoholic construction worker who'd only been training for 7 years, had just defeated one of the most hyped prospects in kickboxing. But Adesanya didn't take that loss lightly. He wanted revenge, and he wanted it badly. 16 months later, on March 11, 2017, at Glory of Heroes 15 in Sao Paulo, they ran it back. This time, both fighters knew each other. Adesanya knew he needed to be more aggressive, couldn't let Alex control the pace. Alex knew that Adesanya would come out harder. The fight started, and immediately you could feel the intensity. This wasn't just a competition, this was personal. They traded for 3 rounds again, both landing hard shots, both refusing to give an inch. Adesanya was fighting with more urgency, but Alex was as durable and powerful as ever. Then, in the middle of the second round, it happened. Alex saw an opening, fired his left hook, and caught Adesanya clean on the chin. Adesanya's legs went out from under him. He crashed to the canvas face first, completely unconscious before he hit the ground. Alex had knocked him out cold, the first knockout loss of Adesanya's career. The image of Adesanya lying motionless on the canvas while Alex stood over him became iconic. It was brutal, it was definitive, and it traumatized Adesanya. In fact, Adesanya's coach, Eugene Berriman, later said that knockout affected Adesanya so deeply that he had nightmares about it for years. It was the moment that would haunt Adesanya's career, this loss to the Brazilian with hands of stone. After that knockout, Alex Pereira's legend was solidified in kickboxing. He went on to win the Glory Middleweight Championship. But eventually, the political and financial realities of kickboxing started wearing on him. The pay wasn't great even for champions. He was getting older, his body was taking damage, and he started wondering what was next. Adesanya, meanwhile, had transitioned to MMA after that knockout loss and was setting the UFC on fire. He'd become the UFC middleweight champion, one of the biggest stars in the sport, seemingly invincible in MMA. He'd left kickboxing behind and found superstardom. And Alex watched all of this from Brazil, still grinding in glory, still fighting for a fraction of the money Adesanya was making, and he started thinking. He'd beaten Adesanya twice in kickboxing. Why couldn't he do it in MMA? There was just one massive problem. Alex had never trained MMA. He was 34 years old, well past the age when most people start learning a completely new sport. He'd never grappled, never trained takedown defense, never worked submissions. He was a pure striker, and MMA required skills he simply didn't have. But Alex didn't care about the odds. He'd never cared about the odds. He'd gone from homeless alcoholic to glory champion. He'd beaten fighters everyone said he had no business beating. Why stop now? In 2021, at 34 years old, Alex Pereira made his professional MMA debut. Most observers thought it was a mistake. 34 is ancient for MMA, especially when you're just learning the grappling aspects of the sport. Analysts wrote him off, said he'd get taken down and submitted immediately by anyone with a wrestling background. Alex won his first MMA fight by knockout. Then he won his second, then his third. He was doing it, actually making the transition at an age when most fighters are retiring. The UFC took notice. In 2021, Alex signed with the UFC, the biggest MMA organization in the world, and everyone knew why. It wasn't just because Alex was winning. It was because Israel Adesanya was the UFC middleweight champion, and the UFC could sell the rematch everyone wanted, the grudge match, the man who'd knocked Adesanya unconscious now coming to hunt him. Alex made his UFC debut in November 2021 against Andreas Michaelis. He won by knockout in the second round, his power translating perfectly to MMA. Then he fought Bruno Silva in March 2022, knockout in the second round. Then Sean Strickland in July 2022, a legitimate contender. He destroyed him, knocking him out in just 2 minutes and 36 seconds of the first round. 3 fights in the UFC, 3 knockouts, and suddenly Alex Pereira was the #1 contender. He'd earned a title shot in under a year. It was one of the fastest rises to a title fight in UFC history, and he'd done it in his mid-30s against people who'd been training MMA their entire lives. On November 12, 2022, at UFC 281 in Madison Square Garden in New York City, Alex Pereira faced Israel Adesanya for the UFC Middleweight Championship. 5 years after their knockout in kickboxing, they were going to settle it once and for all. The build-up to the fight was intense. Adesanya was haunted by those kickboxing losses, especially the knockout.
He talked about Pereira being the boogeyman, the one opponent who'd gotten in his head. Alex, meanwhile, was calm. He'd done this before. He'd beaten Adesanya twice already. Why would this time be different? The fight started, and immediately you could feel the intensity. This wasn't just a competition. This was personal. They traded for 3 rounds again, both landing hard shots, both refusing to give an inch. Adesanya was fighting with more urgency, but Alex was as durable and powerful as ever. Then, in the middle of the second round, it happened. Alex saw an opening, fired his left hook, and caught Adesanya clean on the chin. Adesanya's legs went out from under him. He crashed to the canvas face first, completely unconscious before he hit the ground. Alex had knocked him out cold, the first knockout loss of Adesanya's career. The image of Adesanya lying motionless on the canvas while Alex stood over him became iconic. It was brutal, it was definitive, and it traumatized Adesanya. The man who knocked Adesanya unconscious was now coming to hunt him in MMA. Alex made his UFC debut in November 2021 against Andreas Mikides. He won by knockout in the second round, his power translating perfectly to MMA. Then he fought Bruno Silva in March 2022, knockout in the second round. Then Sean Strickland in July 2022, a legitimate contender. He destroyed him, knocking him out in just 2 minutes and 36 seconds of the first round. 3 fights in the UFC, 3 knockouts, and suddenly Alex Pereira was the #1 contender. He'd earned a title shot in under a year. It was one of the fastest rises to a title
Fight in UFC history, and he'd done it in his mid-30s against people who'd been training MMA their entire lives. On November 12, 2022, at UFC 281 in Madison Square Garden in New York City, Alex Pereira faced Israel Adesanya for the UFC Middleweight Championship. 5 years after their knockout in kickboxing, they were going to settle it once and for all. The build-up to the fight was intense. Adesanya was haunted by those kickboxing losses, especially the knockout. He talked about Pereira being the boogeyman, the one opponent who'd gotten in his head. Alex, meanwhile, was calm. He'd done this before. He'd beaten Adesanya 2 times already. Why would this time be different? The fight started, and for 4 rounds it was competitive. Adesanya was using his superior MMA experience, mixing in takedowns, grappling, things Alex wasn't comfortable with. It looked like Adesanya might finally exercise his demons. Then came the 5th round. Alex came out for the final round knowing he was behind on the scorecards. He needed a finish, and that's exactly what he delivered. He started landing heavy shots, backing Adesanya up, and you could see it in Adesanya's eyes, the fear creeping in, the memory of being knocked out cold in Sao Paulo. Alex pressed forward, landed a brutal combination, and Adesanya crumbled against the cage. The referee stopped the fight at 4 minutes and 21 seconds of the 5th round. Alex Pereira was the UFC middleweight champion. The kid from the favela, the former alcoholic, the guy who started training at 21, had just become a world champion in the UFC at 35 years old. He'd knocked out Adesanya for a 3rd time, this time taking his championship belt. It was one of the most remarkable stories in combat sports history. But for Adesanya, it was another nightmare. They ran it back 6 months later on April 8, 2023, at UFC 287 in Miami. This time, Adesanya came in with fire. He knew he was facing elimination. Lose to Pereira again, and the mental damage might be permanent. And finally, Adesanya got his revenge. He knocked Alex out in the 2nd round with a devastating right hand, reclaiming the UFC middleweight championship. For once, Alex had been the one knocked unconscious. It was his first stoppage loss in MMA, and it was devastating. He'd held the belt for less than 6 months. But what happened next showed who Alex Pereira really was. After losing the rematch, most fighters would have stayed at middleweight, demanded another shot at the title. But Alex made a bold decision. He was done cutting weight. Making 185 pounds was killing him, draining him. He was going to move up to light heavyweight, where he could fight at a more natural weight. Critics said he was running from Adesanya. Alex didn't care what anyone said. In his first fight at light heavyweight, he absolutely demolished Jan Blachowicz, a former champion, knocking him out in round 2. Then, in November 2023, just 8 months after losing the middleweight title, Alex fought Jiří Procházka for the vacant light heavyweight championship at UFC 295. He knocked Jiří out in the second round and became a 2-division UFC champion. From losing the middleweight title to becoming light heavyweight champion in 8 months. From his first UFC fight to 2-division champion in 2 years, it was unprecedented. Alex defended the light heavyweight title against Jamal Hill in April 2024, knocking him out in the first round. Then against Jiří Procházka again in June 2024, winning by knockout in the second round. Then in October 2024 against Khalil Rountree Jr. at UFC 307, winning by knockout in the fourth round. But then came Magomed Ankalaev, an undefeated wrestling specialist who many considered a nightmare matchup for Alex. They fought for the light heavyweight title, and for once, someone had figured out the blueprint to beat Alex Pereira. Relentless wrestling and grappling, taking Alex into deep waters where his striking couldn't save him. Ankalaev won by decision, taking the title. The critics came out immediately. They said Alex was old, said the game had passed him by, said he'd never get the belt back from a wrestler like Ankalaev. Alex didn't respond to the critics. He went back to training, sharpening his takedown defense, preparing for the rematch. On October 4, 2025, at UFC 320 in Las Vegas, Alex Pereira fought Magomed Ankalaev in an immediate rematch. This time, there would be no wrestling clinic, no domination on the ground. Alex came out like a man possessed. 80 seconds in the first round, he caught Ankalaev with a brutal combination and finished him by TKO. 80 seconds. He'd reclaimed the UFC light heavyweight championship in 1 minute and 20 seconds. The doubters were silenced. The critics were embarrassed. POATAN was champion again, and he wasn't done yet. As of today, Alex Pereira stands as one of the most dangerous fighters on the planet. He's the current UFC light heavyweight champion, ranked number 3 in the pound-for-pound rankings, and at 38 years old, he's still knocking people unconscious with that same devastating power he had when he walked into a gym for the first time at 21. His story is the story of transformation. From a kid who had nothing, who destroyed himself with alcohol, who worked construction jobs that broke his body, he built himself into a champion through sheer will and violence. He didn't have a privileged upbringing. He didn't start training as a child. He didn't have advantages. He had poverty, addiction, and a pair of hands that hit like stones. And he used those hands to carve his name into combat sports history. He proved that it's never too late to change your life. He proved that where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. He proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon you can have isn't technique or athleticism. It's the refusal to accept defeat. Alex Pereira is not just a fighter. He's proof that even when the world has written you off, even when you've written yourself off, you can still become something legendary. All it takes is the courage to walk through that gym door and the will to never stop moving forward, no matter how many times you get knocked down. That's the story of POATAN, the stone hand, the two-division UFC champion, the man who knocked out the unbeatable, the kid from the favela who became a king.